Welcome back, everyone, to NeuroAlchemy, where science meets soul and where healing is understood as nonlinear, multidimensional journey. I'm your host, Dr. Sarah Young. Here on NeuroAlchemy, we slow conversations down on purpose. We define our terms clearly, we name complexity without overwhelming, and we approach healing as a multidimensional process that honors both the brain and the lived human experience. Because clarity creates safety, and safety opens the door to deeper insight, choice, and healing. Today's conversation explores my favorite topic: brain health, nervous system healing, environmental toxicity, neuroprotection, and what becomes possible when someone refuses to let a diagnosis define their future. As always, you're invited to listen gently. Pause when you need to. Nothing here is about perfection, so everyone feel free to take a breath. You don't need to decide anything today. Today, I'm joined by Mark Burnett. Mark's healing journey began after toxic exposure led to neurological symptoms and a diagnosis of Parkinson's disease and Alzheimer's, early Alzheimer's. And I want to pause there because for many people, a diagnosis like that feels like an ending. But in Mark's case, it became the beginning of something else entirely. Rather than accepting that his decline was inevitable, he immersed himself in the science of neuroprotection, inflammation, and cellular health. And if you don't know what those things are, don't worry. We will be going over it in a way that is easy to digest and understand, as we always do. Through research, experimentation, and tracking his own data, he regained balance in his functioning, and then he went on to create My Brain Restore. Mark, we are so grateful that you're here. Welcome to NeuroAlchemy.
I am very happy to be here, Sarah, and looking forward to it.
Before we go any deeper, I always like to just check in with everyone and see how we're arriving today. So how are you arriving, either physically, emotionally, mentally, energetically, spiritually, however that may be, as we begin our conversation today?
Every one of those words you just used describe me. I am 100% excited about what I've done. Basically being able to turn Parkinson's stage 3 into stage 1 or less, and be able to turn around Alzheimer's, and it's like I'm 30 again. So I feel like that way, and that's amazing. And I'm 67. So
And we're just so grateful that you're willing to share these things with everyone else. Isn't it such a powerful thing when you go through your own transformation? And then through that transformation, you're able to cultivate that to help others. Mark, I don't think there's anything that's more rewarding than that, do you?
not at all. No, it's so much in my heart when I have people actually, call me or take my product and stuff like that. And then they say, wow, I was able to walk on my own today. Or I, threw the walker across the room, did what I
Wow.
wanted to do, and those are heartwarming stories. And we'll get into some of those that I've gotten, but they're quite amazing. And I think that's, it's not just me getting better. It's all about what I've discovered and trying to share with everyone else how to beat those things.
That's exactly it. And that's what the show is all about. There is hope. We are resilient. There is always a way. There are other things to learn. We don't know everything like we think we do sometimes. And sometimes the people that giving us direction don't know everything there is to know about our journey either. So I love that. You are so much like me. I know I shared that a little bit earlier. You just like, this is not going to be my life. I'm going to figure it. I'm going to do better than that. And that's exactly my journey as well. So I
Right.
have such a great appreciation for that. And for everyone out there, however you're showing up today for this conversation, I want you to remember that it's enough. Exactly how you are right now, whoever you are, wherever you are, you're perfect.
Yep.
Before we dive into your story, I'd love to ground a few terms just in human language. Words like neurodegeneration or inflammation, sometimes, if you're not familiar with the territory, might sound abstract or even a little bit frightening. So we're going to slow them down. When you talk about nervous system regulation, what does that actually look like in daily life?
Well, in my particular case, I was on one of the most contaminated bases in the United States, Camp Lejeune, which everyone knows had the toxic water. And I was born on that base. So my mom was in utero on that base. And my first drink of formula, unfortunately,
Mm.
was that toxic water. So the TCE in that water and stuff affected me. So that's where I'm talking about over time that TCE had a hold of me. It was in my body. I was there for many years. And when I was younger, I started having problems. I have root canals in every one of my teeth. Every dentist I've met said, "How did that happen?" Because it destroyed all the nerve components in the teeth that made them highly sensitive. No one understood what I had for years and years and years. And eventually I developed Parkinson's, which was showing. And then we got more into that as to how that happened. So that neurodegenerative component was falling apart from the day I was born, essentially the day I was conceived, because my mom lived on base. So, it's not a good prognosis to go forward with. But I think what you always have to know, and your audience has to know, is you have to fight forward. You have to look outside that box. That's what
Mhm.
I did. I said, okay, you've just given me sort of a sentence of, you're not going to get better. This is it. This is the way your life's going to be, neurologist, and number two word, neurologist.
Mhm.
Um, and I said, that's not acceptable. There has to be other ways, and you got to fight back. And that's exactly what I did.
That's
Took my dad,
exactly right. Get it.
Marine spirit, and said, "Yep, let's go."
I just love that so much because that is just so how I am as well. If you've ever heard my story, that's exactly. It's
Yep,
like, oh, really? That's how my life's gonna be? Hold my beer. And I don't drink beer, but you get the idea, right? Like, give
right,
me a minute. I will make that better, like right now.
right, right.
And I'll just add for listeners, regulation doesn't mean that we're calm all the time, right? It just
Mhm.
means that we have the capacity to move through stress and return back to a state of calm.
Right.
Mark, how would you define it?
Well, I define it. I guess part of that also came from my background. I was originally studying to be a veterinarian. That's where I was at. I was actually working in an animal hospital at a very young age. But I learned about computers in my high school years, end of my high school, and actually cracked into the University of Maryland's mainframe, which was probably one of the first hackers in 1975. And because I wanted to learn, and no one would let you touch a computer back then. And you had to go to, learn COBOL or whatever. I'm like, that's a dead language, and it is. And I decided to go outside of that box. I wanted to teach myself, and I bought a computer and everything. But what it taught me was that you start with a blank screen, and you have that blanking cursor at you, and you can make it do anything you want to do. And that knowledge, that base has stayed with me forever. Where here I was faced with neurological diseases, here I was faced with Parkinson's and also Alzheimer's because I carried the gene. So I had both. And I was like, I've got that blank screen in front of me. How do I get around that? The doctors are saying, this is it. Here's some medicine from the 60s, literally. Some medicine from the 60s. I wasn't making that up. And this is what you take. And I said, well, am I going to get better? And they said, no, we kind of call that the honeymoon effect, which means in a few years it won't work anymore. And I'm like, really? No, no good. So I was back to the blank screen, and that's where I really pushed myself to figure out how I could beat what I had. And that was my main goal. How do I beat what I have?
You said, I'm going to be the maker of my own life. Thank you. I will co create, but you will not choose for me.
Correct.
You've also used the word neurodegeneration. For someone that's hearing that for the very first time, what does that really mean?
Well, the neurodegeneration is essentially in the brain. Things are coming apart in ways, it's kind of a little difficult to explain because basically things are getting stuck in the brain. So these are going to be in Alzheimer's, it's going to be amyloid plaque and things like this that get stuck in the brain. They don't go out. They start to damage it, and that causes Alzheimer's. And you have other elements in Parkinson's that also do that. So these things start to break down the brain. The brain doesn't function anywhere. And maybe years ago, we might just call that old age. Grandpa, doesn't remember that, or, he's a little wacky or something like that. And, that's normal. But what I learned is that those things don't have to happen. There are ways to get around that. And that's really the point, is how do you prevent that from happening in today's environment where chemicals are everywhere, and chemicals are keys to that breakdown. They're throughout the environment. In my case, I drank them on the base. But that same chemical that was on that base is in brake cleaner fluid. It's in wig glue. It's in correction fluid. It's the same chemical. And everybody's probably come in contact with it at some point in their life. So it's sort of an epidemic, as one scientist put it, that Parkinson's is an epidemic. But all these are neurological breakdowns in the brain, and it becomes a question of, how do you stop that, or how do you reverse that? And that's where I went.
Yeah, so for all of our listeners out there, another way to think about it is, so the beginning of that word is neuro, so it's related to the neurological system, which includes the brain. And degenerative means that it's deteriorating, right? It's getting worse. It's doing less optimal over time. So neurodegeneration refers to the neurological system deteriorating over time. And then there's neuroprotection, right? So breaking that down, you got neuro, right? So you've got the neurological system, but now we're talking about a positive thing now. We're talking about protection. I love that word because it implies agency. What does protecting the brain look like practically?
Well, for me, it had everything to do with not accepting the norm, I guess. Neurologists, unfortunately, have learned one way to do things, and they, doctors in the United States have that 7 minutes they can be with you, and they have two other patients in the other room, and here's the medicine, here's that, here's the prescription, bye bye. And that's unfortunately what they hand out to everybody, and I just couldn't accept that. And even though I got a whole bottle of that medicine, still, um, the cardopa, things like that for Parkinson's. And I was in a bad state already. I was falling, I was tripping. The neurological components of this were at a stage where I had knocked myself out completely from a fall. Michael J. Fox, very famous person who has Parkinson's, says he's broken, numerous bones in his body. These are horrible situations to be in, and I was at stage 3 Parkinson's, so I'm one step away from a walker, essentially. And I actually went out and had to buy steel-plated construction shoes to walk around in, because I would break my toes, I would hurt myself. But from the neuro component, that extra weight of the shoe helped me lift my foot a little higher. So that was actually helpful, which doctors don't give you. Like, go buy a $34 pair of shoes and you'll be better. And you won't break your feet because they're steel plated. So for me, I was doing those things. But after 6 months of me looking at different research and then taking a different product that I found and used, in January 2025, I went from that to running in the Michael J. Fox Marathon in Washington, D.C. in June of 2025. And that's when everything changed. That's when I went, yes. I had that music in the background, on the beach. I beat it. And then everyone came up to me and said, what in the world are you taking? How did you do that? Because I have the same problem.
You've mentioned inflammation and glial cell health. For listeners who've never heard of glial cells, can you explain why they matter?
Well, glial cells are essentially the components that make the dopamine and that provide the body with the ingredient. And dopamine, you think of it as a lot of different things. Number one, it controls muscles, but also it controls emotions, in the sense that people that have normal dopamine may also have a very normal relationship with their partner and things of that order. Um, where if you lose that dopamine from the glial cells producing those type of things, and they're surrounded by misfolded proteins that grab around them. Okay. And I actually, on my website, mybrainrestore.com, if you go to my journey, you can see I put my medical information there. I have a picture of Parkinson's face right there. It is a misfolded spindle, and that's what's wrapping around those cells, preventing them from making dopamine. And unfortunately, when you finally get to Parkinson's, probably 50% of those cells are no longer functional. They're not working. That's when you start really noticing it. And that's part of the problem. You're already 50% in the hole, so to speak. So the whole idea was, well, how do I get those glial cells working? Well, the easiest way to get them working is to get the stuff that's clogging them up and surrounding them out of there. And that's what I focused on. How do I clear that? How do I make that work? And one of the gentlemen who actually uses my product, my Brain Restore product, is a neurosurgeon. And he takes it. Now think about it. You got a doctor ordering my product who's a neurosurgeon, right? And he knows everything on the shelf is not going to help him. And I got to talk to him, and he was like, look, if you give the chance for the brain to repair itself, if you can clean it, it will take care of itself and start refunctioning. And he hit it on the head. And he's a subscriber, and he's never stopped being a subscriber. So I have to assume that he's quite happy where he's at.
And finally, something that I use myself, and it's also fascinating because I don't think a lot of people talk about it enough. But you also talk about data-driven self-healing.
Yes.
So let's talk a little bit about that, because that involves active participation instead of just passively going through your healthcare, going through life, right? What does that mean in your lived experience?
Well, if you mean in the sense of like research and things at that point, or data driven in the sense of being able to quantify your
There you
improvement.
go.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, for me, I encourage everybody, and we put up on our website ways that they can download PDFs as guides. So those guides are essentially, if you have Parkinson's or Alzheimer's or dementia, those guides represent, before you start taking the product, write down on here or fill out those forms that say, my worst situation is this. I'm going to give it a 10. So a 10 is horrible. The worst situation I have been 0, it's gone. So we want everyone to write all that down, because this is really important to understand, because people with Parkinson's and different diseases are different.
Yes.
Everyone has a different issue. Okay.
That's right. They're not the
People don't
same.
even have tremors.
Right.
But they have Parkinson's. So it's an idea of saying, mark all those things down. You take the product, and every month we encourage you absolutely to redo that list. Go back and see if you can move that number. If you're moving that number in the right direction, in other words, you're getting towards that 0, you're moving it from a 10 to a 7, that's improvement. This is the only real way you're going to be able to quantify how things are working. For me, I was a patient 0. Okay. On the human side, the mice, there's another story about all the mice being cured of this. But the first, second mouse, okay. But for me, I didn't do that. And I started getting better, and I didn't know it. You don't notice being normal. You don't notice that I didn't fall upstairs this week, or I didn't trip downstairs. You just kind of go about your daily routine. And it took me like 2 months to go, wait a minute, I haven't fallen lately. I haven't bounced into thing. I can pick up little screws that I couldn't do before, because I had what's called pill roll, where I would pick up something and do this and drop it. Okay, very common Parkinson's issue. And so for me, it was all about, how do I now start quantifying that and understanding it, because I had missed it, early on. And I wanted people now to understand my journey, because I didn't notice it. So if you don't notice these little things that happen each month or each week, you're going to miss that it's working and how it's working. And that's what you really need to concentrate on. So again, we have free PDFs up there. People download. They can put them on their refrigerator. They can hide them next to their bed if they don't want anyone else to know. And they fill them out. And we know this now because we get people calling us and say, "Hey, I got to a 7. I got to a 6." And I'm like, fantastic.
Yeah, Mark, you're going to send me the links in the for the show notes for that, yeah?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So all of you out there, if you're curious, he's going to send that over to me, and you'll be able to access that right from the show notes. So,
Yeah.
yay, that's super wonderful. Let's go back to the moment of diagnosis, because I imagine that experience wasn't just medical, but it was existential. What happened internally when they said those things to you?
Well, this happened for me during COVID. So during COVID, I was essentially, banging into things, taking corners too sharp, tripping for no particular reason. And I knew something was wrong. But also, I didn't want to go to the doctor necessarily overly at that time because I hadn't gotten COVID. And weirdly enough, I did sign up for the National Institutes of Health, was doing long-term COVID studies. They were involved in that. And I became a control guinea pig because I hadn't gotten COVID.
Oh, wow.
So that was a 4-year study that I was in. They were relentless. They took 16 vials of blood every time I showed up. I was like, geez, guys, you leave some. And they put me through every test there was. But they did a smell test. And when they did those smell tests, they said, your smell test is off. That could indicate Parkinson's. It's also could indicate COVID, but you don't have it and you're a control subject. They're very open. Most of these types of research are not open about it. They were great about giving me all the data. So that was sort of a trigger. And then eventually I went to go see my regular doctor, and he thought I had multiple sclerosis, MS, or Parkinson's. He wasn't sure. And he sent me to the neurologist. The neurologist, within, half hour of doing tests, said, "You have Parkinson's." Okay. And it's actually a bit advanced, and again, you get that sort of depressed moment. But for me, and for a lot of people, it's incredibly depressing. It's a huge hit. It's an incurable disease.
I mean, wasn't it scary also? I mean, were you afraid? Did you have fear? Or was it just the sadness?
It was just, for me, it was just the sadness because I'm used to being someone who deals with nightmares. And I mean that in the sense of business. I was a database programmer, and, we were working on worldwide databases. And when they crash, that's a nightmare. And so to me, I had to have a team of people. I said, okay, everybody, you do this, you do that, you do this. Let's go. Let's get it fixed. Let's get up and running because we have people around the world who can't access the system. So for me, that mode that I had learned all my life, and my dad's tenacity as that master sergeant to, take on the enemy. The enemy for me was Parkinson's. And it was just a turn. It didn't take me long, but I understand everybody I knew that had Parkinson's stuff and dementia and things that they were always depressed. It was a hard thing to deal with. It was difficult. But for me, it was, well, how do I deal with this? I can't accept that there isn't something out there that won't help.
So were you immediately curious, or was there a period of time that you were sad and then you became curious and determined?
Well, my sadness probably lasted a car ride home. As soon as I could get to my computer and start doing research, for me, and again, I'm unusual. Don't I'm way off. I someone who just doesn't handle that long. And most people do. They lock onto it. They realize they have I'll call it a very serious situation where they may not recover. And of course, how can you not be sad? How can your family not be sad? Your future caretaker not be sad about your situation? But in mine, it was more about solutions. This is what I was taught to do. This is what my training was. How do I look around and figure out things? And just a little bit of a tangent to understand it. Sometimes I would be working with 10 programmers that would all be in an argument about something. And I said, let's do this. And they said, that's the dumbest idea I've ever heard. And I said, do it anyway. Go ahead and implement it. Watch what happens. I think that'll fix it. Boom, they did it. And they're like, oh, gosh, it worked. Exactly. Okay, I know it's outside the box. It's not what you guys were thinking. And it's weird and stupid, maybe. But let's try it. We're already broken. So what are we going to break it worse? Let's move forward. And that taught me that sometimes most of the times when you face these type of things, you have to think out of the box. You have to think at different levels of how you treat this, and always keep in mind that doctor was taught how to do one thing. They got that 7 minutes with you. They hand you the thing they're used to handing everyone else, and that's what they do. Try to teach them something new. It's really hard. And one of the things this product works on is the glymphatic system of the brain, which was only discovered in 2012 by a Dutch scientist. We'll get into that in a minute. But my point is, I asked one of my doctors, and they said, oh, what? The glymphatic system. And they're like, I don't even know what that is. You mean lymphatic? I said, no, glymphatic. And they were unfamiliar with it. And so that was, again, a red flag, like, okay, my doctor's not really understanding everything. And they wanted me to take a DAT scan, which the Michael J. Fox group said was only about 85% accurate at predicting Parkinson's or showing it. But I took the CIS-1 test. That's what I wanted. It was 95% accurate. And it's just a simple biopsy. I argued with my doctors. They didn't want to do it. They didn't know what it was. I called the lab that made it. And this is how bold I am. I called the lab and they said, what are you, a patient? You're not supposed to be calling us. I said, well, can you send them the kit? And they're like, sure. They did. So when they got the kit, they were really mad. But I said, the kit's here. Let's take the test, do the biopsy. Let's go.
Where did they take the tissue sample from for that biopsy?
They take it right back here in the neck, right next to the spine. They numb it. They put a little pin style, kind of like this kind of style pin, and take a small section of skin and probably a little fat, and they pull that out, which is very, very simple. They take it in the knee and the ankle. So in mine, they took it in those 3 spots, and 2 weeks later, it came back 100% positive for Parkinson's. And on the website, mybrainrestore.com, if you go to my journey, I posted that exact medical result. And it shows that misfolded tendril right there. And that is the face of Parkinson's. That's my Parkinson's, by the way. That's not a model. That's actually my test. But what was amazing was then the neurologist said, this is an amazing test. We'll start using it with other clients.
Oh. Get it, Mark. Get it. You be that face of change. I love it.
Face of change. Yes. So yeah, that was key. And then the next thing was learning. I did carry the gene for Alzheimer's, which is the PEO4 gene. Now I only carried one of them, where they say 2 is like really bad. But I knew from 23andMe actually was the place that brought it up. No one else had brought that up. But I knew I was having memory issues, and I weren't sure that was associated with the Parkinson's component. And so once 23andMe popped up and said, we have a new result for you, and I looked at it, I'm like, oh my gosh, I have the Alzheimer's gene, Then I started realizing, I was the most scariest thing that happened to me. We talk about, okay, this is where I was really scared. I was driving home down a road. I'd driven for 20 years trying to get home. I forgot how to get home. I couldn't remember the turns. And there was no reason for me to not know this. And of course, I'm getting frightened. I'm heart's pounding. I'm driving. And of course, I'm a man from a Marine background, not being a Marine myself, but you don't press Google and say, take me home like you should. You just keep driving until you run out of gas. And but I finally made it home. But it was that moment where my heart was pounding. I was like, wow, this isn't Parkinson's. This is Alzheimer's, and I got 2 neurological diseases I'm facing, and I sort of joke with people. And again, I'm lighthearted. So people would say, this is horrible, you have 2 neurological diseases. And I said, yeah, but with Parkinson's, you fall downstairs, and with Alzheimer's, you can't remember why.
Oh, no.
So, no, but that's the way I am. That's the way you look at life. You have to say, okay, these are the elements that are facing me. How do I deal with them? And if I have to go outside the box to do that, that's what I do. And that's when again, having both of these and then finding a scientific report in Japan that actually cured mice from Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and dementia. That was like, whoa, that's an aha moment. How does that happen? How does one thing cure 3 different neurological diseases they tested in mice? And not everything that they tested in mice goes to humans. But I was very willing to be the next mouse.
You've spoken about redefining identity. What does it mean to redefine yourself when your body changes?
Wow. Well, you really have to, for me, it was all about redefining components of how I do things. I had to be more careful of things. I had to be more conscious of lifting things, trying to do the normal things you do every day that you don't think about. That picking up a penny from the table. It's almost impossible for some Parkinson's people. I had that problem. I couldn't have the right dexterity. So I had to take the penny and push it off to the side into my other hand, like this, to pick up that penny. But again, the fact that I couldn't pick up that penny, or I worked on computers, so little teeny weeny screws. Oh, that was really hard. Okay, so I got a magnetic screwdriver, to hold on to the screws, and that helped somewhat. But I couldn't get the screws if they fell down. I had no dexterity components to do that. So those were quite frustrating. And of course, driving home, I started to learn to use the Google thing anyway, even if I didn't need it, just so I made sure. So technology did help in that respect, but I wasn't going to stay that way. To me, it was like, I cannot go in this direction because with Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, these 2 things, I don't want to say it wrong, but to me, it was a death sentence in the respect of life. Not dying, actually, but your freedom to do what you want to do and to be able to go outside, because many people, and I knew someone who died.
It's like a prison.
It's a prison. It is. And it's a prison sometimes you put yourself within. My friend did, because he didn't like the fact he had tremors and stuff like that. He wouldn't go outside. He wouldn't see people. If I wanted to come over and see him, he said, no, I don't want to see you today. And I'm like, dude, I can come over. No. And eventually he died of Parkinson's, with dementia with Lewy bodies. So for him, and they put him on the most horrible medicine. Oh my gosh, the medicines he took had such huge side effects. They were so rough on him. And, I look at that as even, to the point where one day he eventually went down on the ground and never got back up until he died. He never was able to walk again. And I've seen that happen in real life, and I've tried to help those people. And this is before I knew about this product. And I certainly would have helped him get it if I had known about it. But I hadn't gotten Parkinson's at that time that bad, so I was trying to help him. And in addition, I have another friend who's an auto mechanic who, again, unfortunately, brake cleaner fluid is a chemical that causes problems and Parkinson's. But he has skin cancer and Parkinson's. And he's now taking the product I have. I've been able to get that to him and his wife, who's his caregiver. And even his wife's like, wow, it's a heck of a difference. He is like way jumping up. He feels better about himself, and, he's doing a lot better, and that, it just warms me that I can do that. But it's so hard on caregivers too. It's so hard on the people, and a lot of people do hide in those rooms. I don't hide in the rooms. I go out. I run in the Michael J. Fox Marathon. I'm out there with the crowd.
Environmental toxicity is a complex and sometimes overwhelming topic, but it's also so very real. From your perspective, how do toxins affect the brain and the nervous system?
Right. Well, what I've learned, is that the toxins seem to affect and this is coming from not the Japanese, but a Dutch scientist who discovered the glymphatic system in the brain, which is similar to the lymphatic system, but it's designed to clear the components, those tangles, those things you'll see on my journey, that picture of that misfolded tendril, okay, that's choking off these cells that make everything that you need to be you, okay? And that system was only discovered in 2012. Now you think about that, that sounds like a long time, but in medical science, that's like yesterday. I mean, no one's had a chance to really study it or understand it completely. But what they said was it was clearly, and they nicknamed it the dishwasher of the brain. And that dishwasher of the brain made total sense to me. What you're saying is when it gets clogged and these chemicals affect it, and that could be from gut bacteria causing inflammation into it. Once you get to these points, it could be chemicals such as the TCE that I ran into. You're talking about weed killers, which Harvard University was talking about around golf courses. People are getting Parkinson's. Where is it coming from? The weed killers. Everyone uses weed killers. Okay. These things cause that system to stop functioning for some reason, whether it's clogged or whether it's just shut down. But if it can't clear, it's not going to work. And think about, I'll use a simple analogy. Think about you're drinking water and you can't pee. This is the same thing. Your brain basically cannot move that fluids out. It can't move that those things out of the brain that get stuck, and it just shuts down. And so when I put the Japanese report, which cured all the mice with Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, and dementia, and the Dutch report together, which no one had done, these guys weren't in the same room, but that was my job as a database person, put the data together and figure out what made sense. I realized the Japanese in the mice had actually gotten that glymphatic system to function and work. And when I started taking my product and everything, I started noticing things getting better every month. Like I said, it, didn't really come to my brain, realization for 2 months that, hey, I'm better. And then it only got better and better. And now, literally, I went to the neurologist a couple of weeks ago, which probably isn't in your data yet. I'm going to post it shortly. And she said, honestly, I cannot say that you have Parkinson's anymore. I would say you're in complete remission. And she goes, this is amazing. And she noted what product I was taking in her report. And she goes, I'm going to talk to my partner and see if we can get some other people in some trials and help out, because there's a lot of people like you that need help. And it took me 1 year to get there, to that point. But, it does show that that glymphatic system works, because my Alzheimer's also went away. And that went away pretty quickly. And my wife's 15 years younger than me, so I'll explain how I did this. I bought this $12 game, this memory game. I think I had it here. But it's a memory game where you have animals, and you have a set of two animals, and it's a kid's game. And you lay out all these cards the other way like this, and when you turn them over, it shows animals. We can only turn over, 2 at a time. And then you have to match the animals. Well, my wife was like, I'm going to beat you because you have Alzheimer's and you don't remember anything, And I said, no, I think I'm better now. And I actually beat her so bad she won't play anymore. She gave up. So my memory, I knew right from there, boom, a simple $12 product that I could use to test my memory, and boom, I got better. And then I started getting sharp. I knew why I went in a room. I knew where my wallet was. I knew how to drive around and do things. Everything came back.
One of the things that stands out in your story is you didn't outsource your healing, but you came involved. What changes biologically and psychologically when someone moves from this is happening to me to I'm participating in my own recovery?
Wow. I think, and again, this is learning from my clients that subscribe to the product and get it all the time and have been using it. Those have been some amazing stories, that people call me on it. And I started noticing that when people were ordering from our website, I'd see the name DR in front of their name. So I knew they were doctors. So somehow I got in some forum where doctors were involved and they started, ordering. And one of them was a person who had a nature trail behind her house. And she said, I'd walk down that nature trail with my husband, and I had to hold his hand because there were rocks and things like that that would throw me off balance. After 3 months of taking your product, I let go of my husband's hand and walked all the way back on my own. And she goes, that's the first time I've ever done that. And my knee-jerk reaction to that when she was telling me was, I'm sorry I broke you two up, that you don't hold hands anymore. and she was like, it's amazing, what it did. And other, people that are taking it are seeing different results in different ways, because again, everybody's different in this way. But I love to hear their stories and, where they've gotten to and how they've gotten. So my main point of that was, okay, it worked on me. And at the Michael J. Fox group, actually, people saw me run the race and they came up to me and said, how do I get what you got? Because, what are you taking? What did your doctor put you on? And I said, doctor didn't put me on anything. I took what the mice took. And I actually have a shirt that says I took what the mice took. I wore that at the Michael J. Fox Marathon. And, I got a lot of pat on the back for trying something new and breaking out of the norm. But also I got a lot of people saying, can I get it? And at that time, literally, I had the jar product right here. I didn't have a label. And people were buying it without a label. They were just like, I'll take it. They get it to me. Now we're pretty. We have a beautiful label. We look good and all that kind of stuff. We have all our codes and FDA statements and everything else on it. But, before that, it was really listening to those stories. And for me, that was incredibly important that I was able to help people in that regard. But I don't want to call it selfish, but for the first 6 months, I did not release it. I did not tell anyone about it because I wanted to make sure it worked in me. That was really important, that I could move the needle on that. I didn't know if it'd move it on Alzheimer's, but it moved it so well on Alzheimer's. Essentially, there is a way to test Alzheimer's. It's called the amyloid beta 4240 test, and people can go take it. Matter of fact, there's another one called Lumipulse, which is new FDA approved one, although that one's kind of expensive. But I had taken that test in 2023 when I realized I might start having Alzheimer's. I had the gene for it, and I failed it. I was in the red. And again, I post this on the website. Google says you cannot change that test. Once you get that, I asked Google, can it be changed? Do you ever get better? No. My doctor said, no, you don't get better. And they wouldn't order the test. They refused to. They're like, no, you're not going to get better. You took it once, you're not going to get better. But I've been taking my product. I want to see if it worked. It should. I feel better. I can know I'm sharper. But they wouldn't do it. And this is where you get stuck in medicine. And I called 10 online doctors until I got one that says, I'll do it for you. I'll order it. Go ahead. Same lab, Quest Diagnostics, same test number. I wanted it exactly the same. I went and got it. I moved that needle by 10%. I got 10% better according to that blood test. That means that the amyloid beta, stuck in the head, was going through the glymphatic system, moving into the blood where it could be seen by the blood test. And then it moves into the liver to be broken down. And then it becomes harmless. And that was the key to tell me, okay, now I know that's moving because there's no way to move that test. But I'm the first person in the world who has moved that test. And I'm challenging the Alzheimer's Association. If you're listening, Alzheimer's Association, I've called you many times because I go to their meetings and I've been in their marathons, and they say they'll give a white flower to the first person who beats it. And I'm asking them to award that flower to me.
On this show, we talk about science and soul. Some people see those as opposites, but your story feels like an integration. How do you personally hold both scientific rigor and something deeper, faith, intuition, spirit?
Well, for me, I would say it would be intuition. And again, that's the way I worked in databases. I had a weird way of being able to look at databases and understand anomalies very quickly, where most time people programming them and developing didn't see the anomalies. So for me to be able to look at a database and see anomalies or components in them that that number doesn't make any sense, we used to call it floating things to the top in a database. In other words, you would simply look at different components of the database and go, that doesn't make any sense. For me, it didn't make any sense that there couldn't be something else out there. But then when I read these reports in Japan about them reversing Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, and dementia in mice, my intuition was to say, whoa, what did they do? Well, I understood one thing they did. They were trying to make a $10,000 a month drug out of it. And they didn't. They could not figure out the natural ingredient, this natural fruit plant that I had never heard of before. Okay. And its seed is what they used. And I'm like, why not just use what the mice got? But that wasn't their goal. That wasn't who they were paid by. And I got a hold of that scientific journal. So that intuition to me was like, just become one of the mice. You know, if it works on them, it might not work, but you give it a try. It's back to my database stage. Hit the button, put in this code. If it blows up, it blows up. If it doesn't, take the code out. Okay. If it works, then we have a solution or we have an idea. So to me, that was right where I was. I was like, let me source it. Let me find it, which was hard to find the right cultivator. I finally found people that had it and was able to get it and source it and ship it. And that's how I started grinding it, milling it, figuring out how to make it, and then taking it. And I had to make it palatable. In other words, Parkinson's people have trouble, as you know, swallowing. So they were like, why don't you make this into a pill? I said, because Parkinson's people can't swallow pills sometimes, and that's hard for them. So we made it into a powder, almost like a protein shake kind of thing, where you could put it in yogurt, or you could put it in, pudding, and some people put it in applesauce, chocolate milk, things like that. But I had to make it palatable and make sure that it wasn't a problem, but it wasn't. It didn't create any real issue. I did some testing with it with other people. Everybody felt good about it. So it worked. And then, after taking it, then I was able to move forward. But my intuition was really the key. My ability to look past points and not worry about, okay, this is not FDA approved, or this was an experiment over here. This is my life we're talking about. This is my future. I'm willing to try it, even if no one else is willing to try it, because someone has to do it. Someone has to sail around the world and not be afraid it's flat.
Many listeners are living with chronic illness, neurological symptoms, or fear about the future. If someone feels defined by their diagnosis, what would you want them to hear right now?
Well, if they're defined with, you're talking about being defined with Parkinson's or Alzheimer's or something like that? Yes. Well, I want them to understand there's an alternative out there now. What I have done has certainly shaken up a lot of people that are now using it, but there's no reason you should suffer. This is something that has worked. It's working in other people. Doctors, I can assure you, doctors fight back on it all the time. They're like, no, just take what I'm taking. I've heard this from numerous people. And I had one lady I just spoke to who's down, I won't say where she's at, but she's at a major university hospital. I'll just put it that way. And that major university hospital is like, she brought the study I had with her, and they said, I guess you can go ahead and take it. I don't know what it is, but we're going to be monitoring you anyway. So if you get better, that would be fantastic. So she's committed to it. She's going to do it because they don't offer anything else. I mean, in Parkinson's, you're talking about deep brain stimulation, which, it causes electrodes to be put in. They're repurposing cancer medicine to be used. These are things with serious side effects, serious changes in your life. And I've seen them all. And to me, this is just simplistic. It's nature. It's a supplement. It's Mother Nature who figured out something, a long time ago, but nobody noticed it. And there's a reason for that, because a lot of people heated this product, and heat, the scientists found out, immediately destroys it. It doesn't work. So that's why we put it in pudding. That's why we do it the way we do. We do it in this powder form. So when people get it, essentially this thing should zoom in on it. Okay. That's the powder form. So we mill it very cold. We do what's called ultra chill milling, and that brings the temperatures way, way down. And that's what preserves all the components of that seed. And it's a seed from a fruit plant. That's all it is. And the seed is called ZC-Fa, which nobody knows. I'd never heard of this stupid thing before. I was like, what is that? But then I learned there's 100 different species of it all around the world. And it's not consumed that much, but it is a plant that's out there, and the scientists only use one subspecies of it. They knew for some reason that only one version worked, and they didn't say why, but that's the species we get, only that one.
We always end our conversations with what we call a micro practice invitation. Not a grand protocol or a 10-step system, but a small doable action. And we recommend that our listeners try this out every day over the next week. Mark, what's one simple practice listeners could explore this week to support brain health or nervous system resilience?
Well, I think since I've done a lot of research already, they should come to, mybrainrestore.com, which is back here. My camera's chasing me. Mybrainrestore.com, and read everything I've already done. That's the most important thing. Don't buy anything. Go there and read it. They can go to the free, they can go to the FAQ, click on free PDFs, and they can download my book. And my book goes into everything that happened to me in Tampa, June, how I got where I got, my medical information, everything's there. And they need to read. They need to do that. The research I did, they need to look at it and see if that works for them. If it doesn't, that's okay. But at least they learn something, and they might understand more things, from it. And I did all that work to get away from Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. And I hope that they have the opportunity to look at that and study it. It may not be for them, but at least they learn from it, learn about these issues, and learn how to fight back.
So I'm going to create that a little bit beyond what he said. So my challenge to all of you is, yes, please take him up on that offer and look at his website, but let's make it a little bit more generalized. So every day over the next week, we want you to spend between 5 and 10 minutes learning about brain health, learning about what you can do to improve your life. That can be on his website. It can be on any of his reading materials, or just anywhere where you can learn about how to improve your life. So it doesn't have to be there. Since we're asking them to do this every single day for 5 or 10 minutes, I want to open that up and not limit it too much. As we close, I'd love to ask you, after hearing our conversation, what do you hope our listeners walk away remembering about themselves?
Well, I think the important word you said there is walk away. In Parkinson's, it's very hard to walk. So I'd love to see him walk away. I'd love to see him walk and do the Michael J. Fox marathon, and go that. If they have Parkinson's, go to those groups. They have marathons. Alzheimer's, you get to meet other people with that. These groups are all over the United States, all over the world. And you get to meet other people and share other things. This is great events to go to and to learn, what they're doing. But also remember, on the other side, doctors may be locked into what they're thinking and not looking at new things. So look outside the box.
I have to ask, have you written a letter to Michael J. Fox?
Yes. Unfortunately, I have written to Michael J. Fox. They actually have reached out to me on another occasion. They're asking me to speak at Congress. So I plan to be down because I'm near Washington, D.C. And so there's an open invitation right now. We're working with them on that. Also, yesterday, they signed me up with another study to understand what I'm doing. And I mentioned my product and things like that. So I may be in that study so that they do that. The Alzheimer's group has been a little bit more tighter. They tend to give out flowers of different colors, and they plan to give out a white flower, to that person that beats, Alzheimer's. But as you can see here, I'm communicating with everybody here and doing everything, and my Alzheimer's is pretty much gone. But those are good groups to a certain extent. But realize their job is to make money, or they're nonprofits trying to raise money for big pharma and other companies. So they're not likely necessarily, you got to look outside that box to look at something simplistic. That's not their job. And so take that with a grain of salt.
And I would just say to everyone out there, I'm living proof. Mark is living proof. Both of us were diagnosed with irreversible neurological destinies that did not give us good futures. And both of us said, not for me, thank you. We're going to find another way. My life isn't going to be the way that you define it to be. And both of us are able to have a wonderful multidimensional conversation with you today when, we were told that wasn't going to be our future, but we decided what our future was going to be. So I just want to encourage everyone out there who's listening that just because someone's told you what your future is going to be, it doesn't mean that you have to subscribe to that or agree to that.
Right.
So, Mark, thank you for your honesty, your discipline, and your willingness to explore both science and the spirit in your healing. To our listeners, thank you for being here. If something in today's conversation resonated with you, please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing to this episode. That's how these conversations travel, and that's how people who need to hear them get to hear them. I want you all to remember you are not broken, you are becoming. I'm Dr. Sarah Young, and this is NeuroAlchemy. Until next time, bye for now.
Thanks, sir.